The stage is set for the grand finale, Netanyahu's closing argument and final curtain call. History teaches us that supremacist ideology, once it gains power, if left unchecked, will take humanity down the path to another never again moment. Sadly, but unsurprisingly, we have arrived once again at a never again moment. The rehearsals and daily shows have been taking place for almost 6 months in Gaza and the West Bank. The grand finale is fast approaching. Rafah, on which the eyes of the world are focused, will be the main venue for the grand finale, with an accompanying venue in the West Bank. The time has yet to be determined, but could coincide with the end of Ramadan, Eid al-Fitr, or thereafter. Before summarizing the shows and rehearsals that will bring about the grand finale, the never again moment, let us give an overall view of where we are in this conflict. The rehearsals and daily shows began after the horrific and vile acts against Israeli civilians, including children, and soldiers perpetrated by the armed wing of Hamas and other groups from Gaza, who would say that this was in response to the decades-long brutal, inhumane oppression, siege, the indignities suffered by Palestinians at the hands of the occupier state of Israel. We must note here that the Israeli army fired on some of those killed at the Nova Music Festival, believing that they were members of the attacking group. In response, Israel, the country with the fourth most powerful army in the world, aided and abetted in one form or other by the United States, the most powerful country in the world, Canada, United Kingdom, many countries of the European Union, especially Germany, Australia, and New Zealand, have unleashed what can only be described as unprecedented and indiscriminate bombings, even in modern times, of more than 25,000 tons of bombs. That would be the equivalent of 2 nuclear bombs on an area that is 1/4 the size of the City of London, England, or 1/2 the size of Toronto, Canada, in less than 1 month. The actions of Israel have targeted mostly civilians, more than 85%, almost 1/2 of them children. The bombardment from land, sea, and air with bombs, drones, including quadcopters, and the attacks by bulldozers, gunfire from tanks, Israeli soldiers, snipers, and ships have been relentless, non-stop, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, except during the brief ceasefire pause, November 24th to 30th, 2023. Most buildings have been badly damaged or destroyed in all of Gaza, including residential buildings, shelters, homes, museums, schools, universities, mosques, and churches. Bakeries and most of the infrastructure, including roads and water treatment facilities, have been destroyed. Hospitals have been badly damaged and or parts of them deliberately blown up, perhaps to cover the crimes of the Israeli army, most out of use, and those in use barely functioning without fuel, food, medicines, the bare minimum. More than 30,000 people have been slaughtered, more than 85% of them, as stated previously, civilians, almost half of them children. There are thousands more unaccounted for, buried under the rubble that is now most of Gaza. Almost 80,000 have been maimed and wounded. Once again, most of them children. Some of the injuries suffered by children include flesh permanently pierced or tattooed by embedded bits of metal, wood, and glass, and burned so severe that their bones are exposed. More than 1.5 million have been displaced. American complicit State of Israel made famine and disease now stalks the people of Gaza. In the West Bank, in what has been the daily lives of Palestinians for decades, there is now an acceleration of attacks, arrests, destruction, and suffering meted out by both the state-sanctioned marauding gangs of settlers and the Israeli army. If Gaza is the world's largest open-air prison, and soon to become perhaps the world's largest graveyard for children, the West Bank might be considered the world's largest halfway house, where the inmates must check in and out as they come and go from their homes and neighborhoods, where their freedom might be withdrawn at any time, according to the whims and fancies of their state or individual overlords, masters, guards, and overseers. The lives of Palestinians are inconvenienced by the needs and desires of illegal settlers. For example, the lives of 300,000 Palestinians might be heavily inconvenienced by 700 illegal settlers when Palestinians are forced to take a circuitous journey of 100 kilometers for a trip that is only 10 kilometers if the normal straight route were taken, because they're not permitted to travel on the same road used by these illegal settlers. Palestinian water pipes are redirected to settlers, their water tanks deliberately damaged or stolen, their orchards and olive trees, some more than 200 years old. By the way, olive trees are usually long livers. They live for between 300 to 500 years, but can live up to 1,500 years. These olive trees are uprooted and destroyed after the crops have been stolen. Farmers are often forbidden to pick their own crops. They're shot, the farmers are. Homes, shops, and cars burnt. Children are beaten and sometimes killed. Animals of Bedouin shepherds are stolen, children and adults beaten and sometimes killed, and families chased away. Palestinians are chased from homes and land that have been in their families for many generations, some for hundreds of years. All these acts are committed under the watchful eye and often in collaboration with the Israeli army. These acts are carried out with impunity, and perpetrators are very rarely held to account. Children, more than 800 of them have been kidnapped and held hostage by the State of Israel since November 2023. According to the December 15th, 2023 article in Time by Armani Syed, it is estimated that 10,000 Palestinian children have been held in military detention over the past 20 years. Sometimes they are released in prisoner exchanges and then rearrested. Some are held captive for years under Israeli detention, draconian military laws, much of it dating to the British Mandate for Palestine, beginning around 1920 to 1948. These laws are used to terrorize Palestinians. Many have been and are tortured and abused mentally, physically, and sexually. We must not fall into the dehumanization and supremacist trap of labeling Palestinian children as prisoners and criminals. Black children in America are also often labeled as criminals. When we label children as criminals, we sanction actions such as handcuffing and throwing a 6-year-old girl into the back of a police cruiser, or a citizen shooting a lost 9-year-old boy in the face because he knocks on a door, as incidents in America show. Since October 7th, 2023, these decades-long par for the course, horrible, unconscionable state-sanctioned acts have accelerated. More than 7,000 Palestinian men, women, and children of all ages, most of them hostages, have been held in captivity, tortured and abused, and forced to live in horrendous conditions of privation. There have been more than 12 unexplained deaths of Palestinians in detention, cold-blooded assassinations of youngsters, army bulldozers deliberately running over injured children, left to bleed to death as ambulances are deliberately denied access to provide assistance. Some of these incidents have been captured on film. Their daily destruction of roads, homes, sewer system, and other infrastructure, and the list goes on. And in what is really very petty, more like stick it to you, thumb in the eye, we are your masters, even symbols, statues dedicated to fallen Palestinians have been deliberately and gratuitously destroyed. On October 26, 2023, the Israeli army even took the time to bulldoze the memorial of Shireen Abu Akleh, located at the entrance of the Jenin refugee camp. Shireen Abu Akleh was the 51-year-old Palestinian-American journalist who was targeted and shot in the head, and in Israeli army modus operandi, deny, and when caught in its lies, give an empty, cynical apology. Bulldozing of the memorial is proof again of the cynical, empty apology and the fact that her killing was deliberate. The lives of Palestinians in the West Bank are akin to the lives of the inhabitants in a futuristic, dystopic, post-apocalyptic, totalitarian state with 24-hour high-tech surveillance, living in daily fear and terror of the enforcers of the tyrannical state, men in night goggles in their tanks, coming to raid and invade their homes or to take them hostage and prisoners at any time. Recently, they were forbidden to smile, to celebrate, or to show any sign of happiness when they greeted relatives released from Israeli prisons during the November pause in the war on Gaza. Indeed, a truly incredulous and remarkable state of affairs. Such orders are those of true supremacists, people who believe in their omnipotence. It reveals the complete subjugation and subhuman bondage of the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza. And I might also add that for every Palestinian prisoner or hostage that is usually released in any prisoner or hostage exchange, Israel makes certain it takes at least 4 or 5 or more hostage and prisoners, or they rearrest those whom they freed in any prisoner or hostage exchange. Anthony Lowenstein, author of the book The Palestine Laboratory, How Israel Exports the Technology of Occupation Around the World, says that Gaza is a laboratory for the arms industry. The people of the West Bank and Gaza are indeed the lab rats and guinea pigs. Surveillance technology has obviously replaced the branding irons of slavery and tattoos of the concentration camps. For the survivors, if any, in Gaza, as the herd of human animals, as Gazans were designated by Mr. Yoav Gallant, would have thinned out, they will soon be subjected to the modern version of tattoos and the branding irons already prevalent in the West Bank, as they might be put into large modern-day camps in the form of dormitories. Gaza is not only a laboratory, but also a live showroom for the combination methods of committing genocide with the different smoke in the mirror, including gaslighting in the glaring sun of broad daylight, and direct with the world serving as spectators. No doubt, there will be many eager buyers waiting to buy the weapons and technology so they too can replicate in their countries or others the art of destruction, the bloodied knife-point tableaus being painted by Mr. Netanyahu and his army with the complicity of America and its allies, as was evidenced at the recent Singapore air show, where some of the Gaza field tested weaponry were on display. These bloodied knife-point tableaus are the landscapes of raised orchards, groves and vineyards covered with the burnt corpses of animals and birds, landscapes of mounds of rubble, dotted with exposed limbs and the graves of those buried alive while they slept in their beds, landscapes of sewage-filled streets and hospital yards littered with more than 24,000 rotting corpses. All supremacist ideology and practices are the same, no matter the brand or mask, be it black, German, Nazi, white, Zionist, Hindu, Christian, Muslim, or English. The playbook is basically the same, with the same goals and the same ignoble means. Some are fast and some are slow in reaching their never-again moment of the annihilation of one group because of many different reasons and excuses, including bigotry, prejudice, the aim of dispossessing the target group of land, money, identity, historical grudge, victimhood, and the list goes on. Sometimes the supremacists cannot even give any one reason or excuse. However, the real reason is man's cravenness for power and control. Mr. Netanyahu and his fellow supremacists have convinced themselves that they have perfected the supremacist playbook. What is this playbook and the shows and rehearsals that will lead us to the grand finale, which, of course, will have no surprises? The playbook is one that Mr. Netanyahu has spent years perfecting with much success. The playbook consists of much smoke to cover the mirror. The smoke is comprised of a cacophony of lies, hollow words, projection, mirage, optics, front page allegations, and back page vindication, flouting all laws, doctored and fake videos, smear, arrogance, desensitization, dehumanization, and flat out make it up fictions of history. The bully pulpit of American administrations, both Democratic and Republican, the cravenness of American politicians, and remember now, the only thing these days that Americans on both sides of the aisle seem to agree on is Israeli policy. They cannot agree to fix their infrastructure. They cannot agree to help their population, but they will all agree on Israeli policy to advance the subjugation of Palestinians. The bully pulpit of American administrations, both Democratic and Republican, the cravenness of American politicians, the Western media, especially the American media, have all acted to disseminate and billow the smoke. They have also helped to dim the light on the colonialism and oppression, subhuman bondage and subjugation that the state of Israel has inflicted on Palestinians for decades. And like most leaders of supremacist ideology and practices, Mr. Netanyahu is overconfident, bellicose, arrogant, and has a certain charm to people of his ilk to attract followers and believers to the supremacist cause and to bully and silence critics and truth-tellers and many of us who can see beyond the facade. Supremacists often weaponize historical suffering, victimhood, prejudices, and grudges in this playbook. Mr. Netanyahu and his ilk have done a masterful job of doing just that. He has weaponized the suffering and persecution of Jews down through the ages, including in the Christian Roman Empire, in ancient Egypt, England, especially during the 12th and 13th century, culminating in 1290 with their expulsion and dispossession for 376 years, the Spanish Inquisition, and the genocide of 6 million Jews in World War II. Mr. Netanyahu and his followers have weaponized this history, and especially the genocide of 6 million Jews during World War II, to create new victims, confound Judaism with Zionism, Jew with Zionists, recreate history in their image to coerce atonement through silent acquiescence to further inhumanity, to bully, to oppress, to silence the truth-tellers, to be lawless, to be inhumane, to project abuser onto victim and victim onto abuser, to keep their boots on the neck of the victim while crying wolf, to force compliance with their lawless, inhumane acts, copyright and monopolize suffering and victimhood, and to patent brutality, violence, cruelty, and persecution. Mr. Netanyahu and his followers have weaponized history to repeat tenfold the crimes of history without critics, to commit atrocities in the glaring sun of broad daylight. Indeed, Mr. Netanyahu and his followers have weaponized the genocide of 6 million Jews in World War II to escape accountability and to cover their tracks as they commit genocide brazenly, unabashedly, live and in front of the whole world. Mr. Netanyahu and his followers have weaponized history to repeat history that we should forgive but not forget. They have not camouflaged their ignoble intent and agenda. we must be ever conscious that suffering does not ennoble. We must be conscious that a people who are victims or were victims can also become perpetrators of the same crime of which they were victims. Unless some find the consciences they have hidden or from which they have fled, this weaponization will surely take us to another never again moment in short order. Mr. Netanyahu and his fellow supremacists have indeed convinced themselves that they will get away with this never again moment. After all, for decades, with the help of the Western media and America, they have gotten away with so much, including flouting every international and humanitarian law. They have never been held accountable for any of the so many egregious deeds committed against the people it has subjugated for so many decades, even children. Little wonder. They have convinced themselves that they're going to commit the mass scale. This has been happening on a small scale over the years in some form or other. Annihilation, expulsion, or the thinning out of the herd of the human animals as they have been designated, the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank, in the glaring sun of broad daylight, in front of the world, with the very active complicity of the most powerful country in the world and other players, powerful players, some of whom have provided both weapons and or excuses, and that they will get away with it. And they very well might, for they're almost there. None of the atrocities that include attacks on hospitals, that have left babies to die and rot on hospital beds covered in shrapnel, collapsed ceilings, spent shells, and shattered glass, have even shaken the consciences of the leaders of these countries. Neither have the emaciated children dying of man-made starvation, children drinking from puddles in streets contaminated with raw sewage and bacteria from corpses of civilians slaughtered by the Israeli army with the weapons provided by America. We might note here that the leadership of these countries also include women. We're often told that if more women rule the world, it would be a more compassionate and peaceful one. This has never been true if we look throughout history. This proves that masks such as gender, race, color, religion, and politics do not predict one's behavior in or out of power. Women in leadership in the ones, the hundreds, or the 10,000s are no more or less craven for power than are men. The character of the individual is the indicator. Let us now look at the rehearsals and shows that have set the stage for the grand finale of this spectacle that most of us who have not fled from or hidden our consciences pray was and is only a nightmare. The Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, first dehumanized the Palestinians by calling them human animals, not dissimilar to language used by Heinrich Himmler, George Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon, and Aristotle to describe and classify people who were not of their race, nationality, or ethnicity. Then the government of Israel and its army set about creating the conditions for this dehumanizing projection by laying siege to an already besieged people, denying the people of Gaza food, water, medicine, and fuel. Like the lowly beasts of the field, Gazans, to stave off starvation, have now begun to eat animal fodder, weeds and grass when they can find them. Much of the grass has been raised by the Israeli army. Women and men are killed by Israeli snipers as they forage for grass, leaves, and weeds to feed their starving children. Gaza has now entered the state of famine, with its children fainting from hunger, too weak to even groan from the pangs of hunger and pain of disease that is now walking amidst all of this. Many are now exhibiting the telltale signs of famine. Hollow, sunken eyes and cheekbones, emaciated and wasting bodies. Some have died, and the number increases daily. And as crumbs are dropped from the sky, while thousands of trucks with food stand at border crossing, people must run to see what they can catch, sometimes losing their lives doing so. The state of Israel started in the north of Gaza, ordering Gazans to move south where it was safe. Of course, that was not true, because they were and still are indiscriminately dropping thousands of multi-ton bombs all over Gaza. And as if the people of Gaza were indeed like the human animals, herds of cattle they projected them to be, the government of Israel and its army kept giving orders for Gazans to move until they have now penned more than 1.5 million people in tents, placed in mud and squalor in a section of Rafah. This was the intention from the beginning. They bombed the buildings of the UN and other NGOs to desensitize the world of the lawless and savage acts they are committing. They first smear their target, as they did with Al-Shifa Hospital, claiming that Hamas's command center was underneath, a claim backed up by the Biden administration, and one can assume torture coerced statements from captured fighters. This created the excuse. They then bombed it and accused Hamas of having done so with a misfired rocket. This was to create doubt and confusion. A short while later, they went in with full force, with bulldozers and guns, evicting the sick and the dying, forcing them at gunpoint to take so-called safe routes, which for many became death traps, as they were ambushed by Israeli snipers and tanks. Upon entering, they first destroyed all the special care departments with specialized diagnostic tools and equipment. When they got away with that, backed up by America, they went from one hospital to the next, using the same modus operandi, destroying the special care departments, along with the diagnostic machines and tools, evicting sick patients in wheelchairs, on crutches, and in hospital beds, cancer patients, patients on kidney dialysis, the young and the elderly, and the list goes on. Sometimes they kill them or bulldoze the living and the dead. This is proof enough that it was more than likely the Israeli army that had bombed Al-Shifa and not a misfired rocket. Of course, because of their nefarious intentions and too many lies, the Israeli army does not permit independent journalists in this theater of war. This serves to cover up crimes and muddy the waters so that there will always be a doubt as to their guilt. Eventually, the world will find out that there were more horrors greater than what we are witnessing on a daily basis. There are few hospitals left in Gaza. They barely function, lacking fuel, medicine, food, water, and personnel, many of whom have been kidnapped, beaten, tortured, held in detention, or disappeared, perhaps slaughtered and left in the streets. On the floors, amputations are performed on children without even painkillers, much less anesthesia, and women are forced to give birth like the lowly beasts of the fields or forests. They have laid siege to Al-Shifa a second time, claiming that they have killed hundreds of Hamas fighters. One must take this with a grain of salt, because they have proceeded to blow up parts of the hospital, so there can be no verification of these claims. Once again, no doubt to cover their crimes. After the bulldozers, buildings are bombed or set on fire to make the crimes impossible to prove. They have killed many of the professionals and destroyed places where identification of the dead can be carried out, and of course there are no independent journalists permitted to enter except those embedded with the IDF. No doubt, they have also had time to fabricate evidence for their masters of this as well. Al-Shifa is the first. They will return to the different hospitals to which they have already laid siege, to destroy what they had not destroyed in the first round, to slaughter more civilians and claim that they're all Hamas fighters, and to destroy tunnels that no one will be able to verify after they bomb and set fire whatever buildings remain after the destruction. This will prove to the Israeli public that they have killed all the Hamas fighters and other groups, and that they have indeed accomplished their goal. The state of Israel has employed the same modus operandi they used on the hospitals, on the few aid trucks that have been allowed to enter. They have been attacking aid trucks since November of 2023, but have now escalated the practice as more and more people go hungry. On February 29th, 2024, the Israeli army had a rehearsal of their plan to have the optics of allowing aid in, but assuring that the people never get the aid. This was the Flower Massacre. They fired on aid seekers and then came up with the excuse that there was a stampede, and so soldiers had to fire their weapons because they felt threatened. According to the IDF, they shot less than 12 people and produced a grainy video to back up their stampede claim. More than 80 people were shot. They were shot in the feet and in the upper body, especially in the head. For many years, it has been the habit of Israeli soldiers to shoot Palestinians in the legs and the head. Those shot in the legs are those deliberately left alive to tell the tale. The IDF were ready with their excuse. The grainy video did not work. They were ready with that grainy video, as mentioned before, to muddy the water, create doubt, and lessen the shock. The grainy video didn't work as an excuse because the victims were there with the gunshots. Obviously, with shots only to the head and legs, mean, deliberate targeting. They then tried to blame Hamas. As with Al-Shifa, they have disproven their own lies and excuses because they have now increased daily their attacks on aid seekers. The state of Israel also claimed that aid goes in, but is all stolen by Hamas. As this is an excuse to starve 2.27 million civilians, more than one half of them children. Furthermore, How can 17,000 or less? Israel claims to have killed more than 13,000 Hamas fighters out of 30,000. So, how can 17,000 or less men in the shadows steal all the aid in the entirety of Gaza, minus the north, with the round-the-clock presence of drones and their traumatizing noise and other surveillance, in addition to soldiers, tanks, fully equipped ships offshore, and human spies? Sometimes they blame the lack of aid entering on the inefficiency of aid organizations. There also appears to be more attacks on convoys carrying food. There are much less trucks with food items that are allowed into Gaza than trucks carrying supplies. Why is that? It is obvious, even to someone as unschooled as I am, that this is another deadly game of mirage and optics, smoke in the mirror, in which the supremacist government of Mr. Netanyahu and his armed forces are engaged. There will be the appearance of an increase in aid trucks entering Gaza to satisfy the world's outrage at this assault on humanity, while they continue with their stated goal as outlined by the defense minister and others. Gazans must be denied food, water, fuel, and medicine. This is their policy of starvation. Food and water are most vital. Once again, starvation is the aim here. The state of Israel has now changed its intentions. The state of Israel has not changed its intention to starve the population of Gaza to death, as the Nazis did in the siege of Leningrad. We should not allow ourselves to be fooled or bamboozled by mirage and optics. But let us ask the question, if Gazans starve, what will the Israeli hostages eat? Perhaps the citizens of Israel should pose that question to their leaders. To thwart the distribution of aid, they have attacked the police in Rafah, who would protect and lead convoys and maintain some semblance of order. They assassinated the director of police investigations in northern Gaza, who was responsible for securing and facilitating the entry of aid trucks into northern Gaza. They have slaughtered more than 100 members of an aid distribution team. Surely, they do not want the people of Gaza, who are now in a state of famine and disease, to get any help. They want to create mayhem in the final days so that they can blame a stampede when they begin the wholesale slaughter, the annihilation, the genocide of the people of Gaza. Volunteers who will see themselves as targets will be afraid to help in the distribution of aid. Israel will then blame the lack of aid getting in on the United Nations organization for the aid not passing through. This will also lead to more deaths, more thinning out of the herd, while the very slow world gets its act together. They have deliberately killed foreign aid workers so that no one will want to come in. The world will be horrified, but that will only last for days. The state of Israel will have achieved its aim. It will investigate itself A case of the fox in the henhouse investigating himself for the death of the chicken, or the cat having eaten the fish on the kitchen counter and asked to investigate himself. The state of Israel will issue an apology. If the outrage lasts longer than a few days, someone might be held accountable until the dust settles. They will be found not guilty and released through the back door. This game is so tiresome, so predictable, one that has been played for decades and never has any consequences. In sidelining charities and the UN and its organizations, slaughtering members of what is law and enforcement to help in an orderly distribution of aid, including members of claims that the IDF have enlisted, the state of Israel is also creating the conditions to justify its desire to remain in Gaza for the foreseeable future, leading to eventual annexation and resettlement. We must watch actions and not listen to the wordplay of good cop and bad cop. Both the good cop and the bad cop have the same intention, and that is the same one espoused by the bad cop, for it is the agenda of their supremacist ideology and practices. However, eventual disorder in what might be left of the rubble that is now Gaza will eventually spread to Israel, because disorder is contagious. Furthermore, the marauding army, gangs, being used by the state of Israel will eventually become cannibalistic and turn on the citizenry of Israel. History predicts this outcome unless a stop is put to this impunity sooner rather than later, when it will be too late. We see and we hear. We are standing in the rain, looking at the raindrops and getting soaked. If we were sugar, we would indeed melt. Do not let anyone gaslight any of us. Annihilation, genocide is what we see. There is no doubt that the Israeli army is carrying out Mr. Netanyahu's order to annihilate the Amalekites and everything that they possess, including their animals and birds. Indeed, those orders are being executed with psychopathic and sadistic zeal, with trophies displayed with pride on the IDF snuff racist, dehumanizing propaganda social media channel, TikTok, and other platforms. In this genocide, the ever-present bulldozer is very important. The bulldozer is used to cover crimes perpetrated by the state of Israel and its army. After its bombings and destruction, the bulldozers move in for further slaughter. The bulldozers are driven over the living and the dead, the healthy seeking refuge and the sick, adults, children, and babies. They often run over them not once, but twice, thrice. This ensures that identity and numbers of those butchered will be difficult to prove, as corpses become one of the ingredients in this state of Israel's specialty stew that also includes rubble, metal, wood, plastic, and the list goes on. Bulldozers are used to destroy infrastructure, including the roads, so that aid trucks cannot enter or will have a very difficult time entering. The bulldozers are used to ensure that even the dead old and new have no resting place. Cemeteries often link us to a place and the past. Graves and tombs act as proof that, yes, our people have ties to this land that goes back further than my generation. The destruction of cemeteries, like the destruction of olive trees that live for centuries, is an attempt to erase the history of those ties for Palestinians, irrespective of their religion. The supremacists want to rewrite that history of any ties to the land, especially in the West Bank. The excuse for the destruction of cemeteries is the search for dead Hamas leaders or dead Israeli hostages. After the first cemetery and the excuse, as in the cases of the hospitals and aid trucks and delivery, it becomes a regular habit. The IDF believes that their psychological game, psychops, of forced normalization will work. And why not? Because they have gotten away with it for so long. Like the population of 2.3 million, the dead have been displaced more than once and are scattered all over Gaza. This destruction of cemeteries is part of the genocide playbook of supremacist ideology and practices. No doubt, if the grand finale in what would be Mr. Netanyahu's closing argument is not rained out, the bulldozer will play a most important role in Rafah. The bulldozer will also play an important part in clearing the rubble that is now Gaza, that is threatening to become the biggest graveyard for children. This state of Israel's vampire, that is revenge, whose bloodlust is a bottomless pit, is one that the world has never seen, never before encountered, for it seems to have enlisted more psychopathic and sadistic energies than are normally attracted to this vampire. Most of these energies are present and were perhaps deliberately designated for Gaza. The government of Israel and its defense forces have used every possible method of violence and cruelty employed down through the ages, many of which collective humanity had decided should not be used, consequently creating many, be they toothless, laws after the mustard gas and chlorine gases and other horrors that elicited poems such as Wilfred Owen's 1999 poem Dulce Decorum Est Pro Patria Mori in the trenches of World War I and the genocides during World War II. They have used the methods of Rome and the siege and burning of Carthage, the annihilation orders given to the English army to quell the first Desmond Rebellion in the Irish province of Munster, 1569 to 1573, and the siege, the raising of crops and farmlands, and man-made famine during the Second Desmond Rebellion, 1579 to 1583, during which and after at least 1,000 of the population of Munster starved to death. They've also used the German general Lothar von Trotha, human fox hunt, human bird shoots, poisoning of the water hose and privation of the Herero in 1904, and the Nazi siege of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, the most horrific of sieges in number alone that claim between 800,000 and 1.5 million lives. And like Von Trotta and others, Israel has used Gaza and the West Bank as a laboratory, and its people lab rats and guinea pigs, in the case of Israel, for its weapons of destruction, including AI, artificial intelligence, and other technology of subjugation and methods of annihilation. Indeed, the government of Israel and its defense forces have set fires to homes after locking the occupants inside so they cannot escape. Dogs to eat, to bite, and torture and attack even the dead. Kidnapping, rape, using snipers to shoot even sheep crossing the streets. Hoodwinking civilians so they can shoot them. Baiting starving civilians with 8 trucks of flour so they can slaughter them. And once again, the list goes on. Everything is on the menu for the Israeli army. In their buffet of this bacchanal, this orgy of cruelty, gratuitous violence, and wanton destruction, it would appear that there is no depraved act of violence that is imaginable or unimaginable that the world has not been forced to watch and hear live and direct, that has not been visited upon the people of Gaza, and to a lesser extent, but no less serious, those in the West Bank. We must wonder if these, our Israeli brothers, are indeed human, part of this brotherhood of man. Yet, despite all this inhumanity that they have heaved upon their Palestinian brothers, our Israeli brothers are a part of this brotherhood of man. Hamas fighters and others who committed the atrocities of October 7th are also brothers in this brotherhood of man. We're all a part of humanity. The sights, the sounds, and the actions of the government of Israel and its army, with the complicity and active participation of the United States by way of its weapons, games at the United Nations, its confirmation of lies to back up unlawful, vile, horrific actions such as the destruction of hospitals, are indeed the face of pure evil, pure, unadulterated evil. And we must call it for what it is, for evil is equal opportunity. No one or no group has a copyright to suffering. No one or no group has a patent for gratuitous violence, wanton destruction, cruelty, or representing the face of pure evil. No one or no group should be given the copyright to suffering and victimhood or the patent for pure evil. No one or no group should be given the green light to perpetrate on another group the crimes of history in any degree that were perpetrated on them. The state of Israel should not be permitted by the consortium of great powers to repeat the crimes in any degree perpetrated on Jews by the Nazis. Neither should anyone be under the illusion that the state of Israel cannot be committing genocide because 6 million Jews were victims of genocide. Just as one should not be under any illusion that a former slave, and there have been slaves of different races, color, religions, and other masks throughout history, would not enslave another. This occurred in the Caribbean. We should not permit anyone or any group to to weaponize history, to bully us and silence and to coerce us into silent acquiescence to horrific acts against any other group. We are all brothers, once again in this brotherhood of that is man. Each one of us a part of humanity. Never again must mean never again for everyone. Never again must be equal opportunity if this brotherhood that is man is to truly become civilized so that we can all live in peace, love, and security and terminate never again moments that keep happening too frequently. The Israeli army has over the decades committed or facilitated massacres of Palestinians, such as Gibeah, 1953, Kafr Qasim, 1956, Rafah and Khan Yunis, 1956, and Sabra Shatila, 1982. The cruelty Mr. Netanyahu and his government and army have displayed in Gaza has had few rivals in recent decades. The speed with which they have slaughtered and injured tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians, almost half of them children, displaced more than 1.5 million people, and destroyed Gaza has no rival. They now hold that notorious and dubious honor, one that no entity should want to hold. What is happening in Gaza will dim the lights on the Holocaust as the older generations die. What will be seared in the memory of the younger generation will be what they are now witnessing in Gaza. What is happening in Sudan is another horror show, but it is Gaza that will take center stage because of who the perpetrator is and the accomplices, and because it is being carried out live and direct in the glaring sun of broad daylight in front of the whole world as spectators. What is happening in Gaza is genocide, carefully planned and slow rolling for decades, but has now taken on an urgency for the perpetrators. We see, we hear. We do not need anyone to gaslight us. We do not even need legal argument to tell us that what we have been forced to witness is genocide. What we have been watching, especially for nearly 6 months, has been the intentional destruction of Christian and Muslim Palestinians by deliberately denying them food, water, fuel, medicine, destroying all their healthcare facilities, educational institutions, bakeries, farms, animals, grass, deliberately removing children by targeting them for slaughter, even when they stand in line for water, imprisoning them, running over them with bulldozers. Under these horrific conditions, with non-stop bombings 24/7, noise of drones hovering, displacement, civilians, including more than 1 million children, are suffering trauma. We do not even have to assume the intention because it is clear. We were told in no uncertain terms that Gaza must be made uninhabitable, that all that is Palestinian, including the animals, must be destroyed. We were told that everyone in Gaza is guilty because they are all Hamas. We must not allow any member of the guardians and saviors of Christian Judeo-Western civilization bamboozle and gaslight us. They have done that for too long. In labeling the Palestinian people human animals, the defense minister was projecting how he and the army view themselves, and they have not disappointed. They have behaved true to form. The gratuitous violence, the cruelty where the living, sick, and the dead are run over by bulldozers over and over again, the tens of thousands of tons of bombs, the mutilation of thirsty children waiting in line for water, the starvation of babies, children, an entire population also served the purpose of desensitization. Even the old dead and new dead have no resting place. This unrivaled, depraved cruelty, wanton destruction and gratuitous violence, and the mass slaughter of so many innocent civilians, more than one half of them children, is so over the top that were not real lives and livelihoods being destroyed, we would believe that we are watching. What we are watching is a parody or some spoof of a C-grade movie. There have been more than 155 days of massacres in the glaring sun of broad daylight. An unbelievable number of heinous, unspeakable crimes and horror, broadcast live and direct with the world as spectators, have been wrought upon the people in Gaza by the Israeli army. Government of Israel sanctioned terror and land theft and usurpation in the world's largest halfway house, the West Bank, had been a daily occurrence before October 7th. This terror, land theft, and usurpation have accelerated and is executed by the Israeli army, other parts of its security forces, and the government's implicit, open secret militia made up of marauding gangs of illegal settlers. Normally, what we are seeing, live and direct, each day, 24 hours per day, would serve to numb and desensitize us to the point that all this horror would be normalized. But the sheer numbers, the degree of gratuitous, sadistic violence, the wanton destruction, the barbaric tools of siege, starvation, thirst, and disease against children and babies have had the opposite effect. Rather than desensitizing, these acts have awakened most of the world. The world now knows the dirty secret of the apartheid, the oppression and brutal subjugation and subhuman bondage to which more than 5 million Palestinians have been subjected for many decades. In the West, this open on flagpole dirty secret was deliberately and carefully managed and obscured by much of the Western media and craven politicians and the smoke in the mirror created by the State of Israel. Others before, and including Mr. Netanyahu, the longest-serving Prime Minister of Israel and his ilk. Fortunately, most human beings have not fled from or hidden their consciences. Too much of an overdose of cruelty, wanton destruction, and gratuitous violence can sensitize the desensitized. Indeed, while the craven politicians leading the powerful Western countries might be desensitized, the populations of their countries are not. history teaches us that that which is hidden must one day come to light. As stated before, all supremacist ideology and practices use the same playbook. The masks, such as religion, politics, race, color, and ethnicity, determine the specific details. In this instance, there is no doubt that many of the details were written long before October 7th, 2023. Possible evidence of this could be the attempt to destroy UNRWA, with the increased focus on that goal beginning in 2017, when Mr. Netanyahu found a more than willing partner in the Republican administration. No doubt, there are willing partners and followers of the cult of Bibi now in the current Democratic administration, biding their time for the opportunity to undermine so vital an organization. The United States will not fund UNRWA until at least 2025. One can assume that this is with the cold calculation that UNRWA, without funding, will no longer exist by then. Other evidence that this playbook was ready before October 7th, 2023, includes the language and the overwhelming and type of propaganda and tactics employed, methods in fighting the war, and the speed with which the IDF has systematically killed many of the people who would be required to keep a society functioning, such as its scientists, tech experts, teachers, and professors, and the killings, torture, and detention of medical personnel and the truth tellers, the journalists. The IDF has also killed many prominent families who might have been able to fill a leadership vacuum in areas of aid distribution. It will not be, once again, in Israel's strategic interest to have mayhem reign in Gaza, because mayhem is contagious and it will also have to confront a settler marauding gang once they have finished with the Palestinians. Sudan and its civil war might very well be Israel's future. It would not be a far stretch to assume that there was a hit list already prepared years before. In this playbook, every move, every smear, every excuse and psychops, including Hamas headquarters under Al-Shifa, on-hand grainy videos such as the one of the flower massacre that might have been taken elsewhere or after people were shot in the head and knees, staged lonely guns and computer, mistranslation of Arabic poster on a wall, spliced videos of tunnel structures, and the list goes on. And then, of course, the destruction of cemeteries to erase any ties to Gaza. Gazans were being evicted, often with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Once again, we see and hear the ease and fluency with which different members of the Israeli government repeat, sometimes verbatim, the racist, dehumanizing language of Nazis, such as Heinrich Himmler, used the propaganda tactics of, among others, one of history's greatest propagandists, Joseph Goebbels, and those actions of the Nazis in Leningrad, the Romans in Carthage, and the Germans in Namibia. I am not supposed to mention Nazis here, but if we are going to move forward, we must call a spade a spade. If we do not want to be compared to Nazis, we should not use their exact playbook. Use their language verbatim. Employ the propaganda tactics of their spin doctor and propagandists and employ the tactics and strategies of their armed forces, the Wehrmacht, the ease, and speed with which the language and tactics are used suggests part of a playbook written before October 7, 2023. Nazis were supremacists, no different from all other supremacists throughout history. All supremacists, once again, use the same playbook. Once again, this is the playbook of the supremacist ideology and practices with specific details tailored according to the mass behind which it hides. Nazi, German, Zionist, English, Muslim, Hindu, Roman, Egyptian, Chinese, Japanese, Zulu, Serbian, Black, Arab, and the list goes on. Supremacist ideology and practices equal opportunity. Other details of this particular supremacist playbook that might not have been planned for years in advance include the head scratching, in quotes, authoritative, evidence-free confirmations of different allegations by members of the Biden administration, like the twice highly likely credible evidence not backed up even by its own intelligence agency against UNRWA that has not been produced but for torture-induced statement of at least one UNRWA staff out of 30,000. Politicians and armies are adept liars, and everything they say and promise must always be taken with a grain of salt. That is lying is part of their job description. Lying is equal opportunity. One might even assume, that the shuttle diplomacy also involved coordination of allegations and evidence-free confirmations, distractions of plans for tomorrow and the future, when for Gaza and the West Bank, there is no today or the present. Promise is a comfort to a fool. Indeed, every move, every bomb, every orchard, and agricultural lands raised, the special care departments and their diagnostic tools and other equipment being the first to be destroyed in each hospital attacked, the destruction of infrastructure, the museums, heritage sites, bakeries, cemeteries, educational institutions, the specific targeting of journalists in the field and of their families in their homes, intellectuals, artists, and other professionals were already decided before October 7th. Names and addresses were already gotten, listed, and waiting. The planned step-by-step displacement of Gazans to their final destination or port of exit, or what will become a mass graveyard perhaps, that is Rafah, was also planned before October 7th. We hear a distracting cacophony of pleadings by various governments, including those who have aided and abetted the Israeli government in the destruction of Gaza and the slaughter of more than 30,000 and counting of its citizens, almost one half of them children, not to enter Rafah. But the destruction of Rafah has been ongoing, increasing in intensity for quite a while, quite some time. Entrance to Rafah will be the final onslaught and mopping up and covering the myriad of crimes. It will be fast because only tents will be there, The bulldozers and the dogs will have a much easier time destroying. Before anyone might have the opportunity to intervene, the crime would have already been done. Every supremacist ideology and cult has a doomsday scenario. We are now fully in that scene. The Amalek solution was planned before October 7th, 2023, for the day when it would be put into action. October 7th, 2023 was that day. The stage is now set for the grand finale. Mr. Netanyahu's closing argument, the final performance, his final curtain call that I pray will be cancelled. Not his curtain call, but rather the stage and what is to happen or might happen in Rafah. Pray that it is his final and will be his goodbye to the world of politics. There is nothing that is necessary for society to function left in Gaza. A voiceless and invisible people, for they have not the powerful to advocate on their behalf. Already dispossessed have been further dispossessed of the nothing they had by the United States, the most powerful country in the world, and the state of Israel, with the fourth most powerful army in the world, with the help of other Western countries, many of them rich and powerful, most of the EU, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Among the more than 1.5 million Gazans now in Rafah, living in tents, perhaps one of the largest tent cities, if not the largest in the world, are many orphans, the sick, the disabled, the old, and the young, at least one half of them children. They are homeless, weary, stalked by man-made famine, disease, and early death. They have been abandoned as if they are not a part of humanity, brothers in this brotherhood of man. They have now been corralled according to the plan, ready for eviction or culling. One wonders if the temporary port of the Biden administration is not being built to facilitate the eviction of as many Gazans as possible from Gaza. This Democratic Biden administration, especially its amoral and immoral State Department, has proven itself to be duplicitous at best, not to be believed for their singular focuses on normalization. They have not learned that things will never be normal when there has been injustice and especially genocide. Mr. Netanyahu has his own agenda and is not a good partner. The angel has thrown the stone to spoil their perfect picture. Much has gone awry, but alas, they're still not listening. There's no hospital to heal the sick in Gaza, no place of worship to give solace to those in despair. Where there is life, there is hope. That hope is certainly a very, very rare commodity in Gaza. In Rafah, the world has once again arrived, as it too often does, at a never-again moment. It appears that it will be a go. Rafah is the venue for Mr. Netanyahu's closing argument, his final curtain call. In his ninth life, and true to real motives of most leaders of a supremacist ideology and practices, is only thinking of his own interests. He does not care about the Israeli hostages. He does not care what anybody wants. He will keep thwarting a peace deal for a forever war he hopes will boost his rapidly sinking political fortunes and keep him out of prison if convicted of corruption charges. He will pretend to be open to negotiations for the optics, but undermine the negotiations with public statements designed to push the other party away from the table. Like the leader of a cult, he's prepared to take everyone, friend and foe, down with him, including his country. They say he has brought prosperity to his country, the prosperity that comes with supremacist ideology and practices is usually followed by destruction because supremacist ideology and practices is cannibalistic. In other words, like most supremacist leaders, Mr. Netanyahu is like the cow that gives a pail of milk and turns around and kicks it over. Alas, the cow has now kicked over that pail of milk. A 6-month window, longer than our other administrations, Democratic or Republican, given to Israel by what seems to be an amoral and immoral Biden administration to commit as many war crimes as possible, create as much misery, destruction and slaughter of civilians, most of them children, is now at its ending. The revenge clock is now registering more than 30 to 1. More than 30 Palestinian lives, mostly children, for every Israeli and foreigner life, and more than 40 to 1 for the injured and maimed. What we are witnessing is the work of the vampire that is revenge, whose bloodlust is a bottomless pit. The more blood it gets, the less satiated it becomes. Its foot soldiers include psychopaths, sadists, vultures, and opportunistic scavengers. Those vultures and scavengers include the eager buyers and sellers of the art of destruction, weapons of destruction, land developers, land usurpers, and the list goes on. This never again moment is and will be very different because it is being witnessed by the world, is being aided and abetted by a consortium of the rich and powerful who have placed others on the low ground of their moral high ground, judging and accusing those others of being bereft of morals for actions they have committed, which are no different, and as a matter of fact, in numbers and degrees less than those committed by the State of Israel. This consortium of shameless pretenders has appointed themselves the upholders of human rights and the saviors and guardians of Western civilization, or some would say Christian Judeo-Western civilization. The actual date of the final performance, Mr. Netanyahu's closing argument, is yet to be determined. It might very well coincide, as I stated in the beginning, with Eid al-Fitr, when everyone is too busy to notice and might be caught off guard or shortly thereafter. It might coincide with Passover or with the opening of America's port. Perhaps the port was a plan between both America and Israel, that if Israel decides to go through with the Rafah invasion, or rather mopping up, that this said port might serve as the port of deportation, disguised as the arrival of a knight in shining at just the right moment. If we know whose idea the sport was in the Biden administration and Israeli government, then we will know the true intention of its creation. We will more than likely see another trip just before the final purpose of the pretend fireman and true arsonist, whose visits always seem to coincide with significant events during this conflict. What might this grand finale include if it goes ahead? There might be an orchestra of bombs, drones, guns, tanks, bulldozers and dogs from the land, sea and air. Perhaps they might release the hungry lions and other carnivores from the zoos at the same time. In the West Bank, that has been severely softened, there will be another orchestra of marauding gangs, soldiers and police, drones, missile bombs, perhaps hangings, burning and pillaging. As Sabra and Shatila and the Kibia massacres 1953, Rwandan, Srebrenica, and Cambodian massacres are seared in the memories of Palestinians and many of us, so will what is happening now and what will happen if this annihilation of the Amalekites come to pass. These images and sounds of the past, more than 155 days, and the finale, the grand performance, will be seared in the memory of all of us, all of humanity, as we watch it performed in the glaring sun of broad daylight. Even Lebanon will not be spared in these different symphonies. We should not be surprised if no one in the West Bank will be allowed to leave the West Bank or their homes at some point. Mr. Netanyahu Unleashed will be on a roll. Some might run into the sea, where they will drown or be fired upon from the sea by the Israeli Navy with American weapons, or with German or English, with the excuse that there was fear of an approaching stampede. Perhaps the barriers at the border with Egypt will be accidentally blown up, so some will rush to the border. They will live to tell the tale. Perhaps in the future, those who live to tell the tale will grow up with vengeance in their hearts, and that will give reason that any attacks coming from them in the years to come will give even more reason for the state of Israel to grab Egyptian territory, for we have to protect our borders. We need a buffer zone, but not from our land, but yours. Where will it end? Great powers are always late to or absent from the table of justice, and in this instance, they have actively participated in the daily annihilation, extermination, and genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. The United States, under the stewardship of Joe Biden and his Democratic administration, is not only late to the table of justice, but absent and appears to have no interest in coming to that table of justice. While that administration's words seem to have shifted, they are but empty words that belie thoughts that actions reveal. We must not fall for the mirage and the optics, the speeches, the visits and requests for more weapons. We must expect, with all the little make plenty shipments of weapons to bypass Congress, perhaps an admission that Israel's prosecution of its war on Gaza is in the realm of war crimes and immorality. And the open storerooms in the Middle East has probably provided Israel with enough weapons to last them for the rest of 2024. An announced embargo by this duplicitous, immoral, and immoral administration, especially State Department, will only be that, a mirage to satisfy disaffected voters. This administration is clear-eyed and focused about one thing, and one thing only: normalization. If that normalization means the death of every Palestinian in Gaza, so be it. Jews have borne the brunt of subjugation in ancient Egypt, persecution as they did in Christian Europe, displacement in the numerous pogroms in Eastern Europe, dispossession in and expulsion from England and Spain in 1290 and 1492 respectively, and genocide in Nazi Germany. All these, as we have discussed earlier in this presentation. It would appear that it is the Palestinian people who have been chosen to pay the price for all the injustices that Jews have endured for more than 3,000 years. Palestinians have been made refugees, dispossessed and expelled from their homeland, brutally subjugated and oppressed under a system of apartheid, suffered different massacres for more than 70 years with the aid of the great powers that are always late to or absent from the table of justice as they were in South Africa. At that time, Canada was at the table of justice under the stewardship of a conservative government. This time it is not under the stewardship of a liberal government. Rather than setting an example to be honest brokers, real firemen with water hoses that are attached to a working fire hydrant, who would bring a fair and just peace between the parties. They have been pretend firemen and true arsonists with gas cans. Because of guilt, cravenness of politicians, and racism, the leadership of these nations have cast their lot with supremacists who have been given unchecked powers to lead us to this never-again moment, the genocide of the Palestinian people. This genocide, once again, as we close, will be one for the ages because of who the perpetrators are and the fact that it has occurred in the glaring sun of broad daylight, live and direct for the world to bear witness. The state of Israel and its conduct, with the complicity of the United States and its allies, have already, and should the grand finale take place, will leave an indelible stain on humanity, a stench that no deodorizer will ever neutralize, and a wound so deep and so wide that no cauterization can or will ever seal. All Jews, not just Zionists, and not just in Israel, whether they agreed with Mr. Netanyahu's actions to annihilate the Amalekites, his army going even further, choosing to annihilate even the grass, will now be known in history, in infamy, not only as victims of a great horrific genocide, but also as perpetrators of another horrific genocide that have eclipsed, or that has eclipsed, the shock of the Holocaust. They will have created their own Holocaust of the Palestinians. In the years to come, I have no doubt that many of these perpetrators, including some in the Biden administration, will also be held to account. Because, when they are no longer in power, and as conscience and whistleblowers emerge from the dark, like the Nazis, they will be hunted, found, and put on trial, as in Nuremberg. Every truth will one day be revealed, sooner rather than later. I wonder what those of my maternal and paternal ancestors who were Sephardic Jews, dispossessed and expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, would think of this truly sad state of affairs. This rolling, unfolding genocide is so horrific and inexcusable that the anger, hate that is generated is becoming greater than even the vampire that is revenge can manage. There is not enough eternal time or generations to avenge the suffering and pain inflicted upon the Palestinian people. As it were, with the transatlantic slave trade, the genocide of the Jews, and the countless genocides, massacres throughout mankind's history. This is when hate has no choice but to give way to love and forgiveness, so that we can all move forward together in peace, security, and love. None of us is without blemish. Every one of us. All brothers in this brotherhood of man. No matter our spiritual mistakes and incorrect actions, can find amazing grace. Pray I that what I fear, being an observer of both history and human nature, that this closing argument, this genocide will not come to pass. Pray I that all, including Mr. Netanyahu, the extremists in his government and country, Hamas and Palestinian extremists, Mr. Biden and his administration will find amazing grace before it is too late for the people of Gaza and the West Bank. As did the author of the song of the same name, John Newton, slave trader turned Anglican cleric and abolitionist, after his near-death experience in 1748 on the ship the Greyhound off the coast of Ireland. May we never try to flee our conscience, so that we will always do correct actions. May we learn to walk a mile in our brother's shoes, so that we can see the humanity in each other. May we respect the differences in each other and know that our Creator has no chosen few. May we find comfort in the knowledge that each of us is slated for redemption and none is excluded. May we find solace in the knowledge that it is not a question of if, but one of when, each of us shall return to our Father. May we know that we are just tenants on this earth and take care of each other, the earth and all the creatures that dwell thereon. May we always adhere to the divine principles of the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. Love. May we know that which I do unto my brother, I do unto myself, for I am my brother's keeper. May the tiny shrouds of light forever illuminate our path through the dark. May peace forever reside within us and between us. One divine, universal